What does war look like through French eyes? Not the Hollywood version with swelling music and shiny uniforms, but the version shot in real trenches on real soil with real fear. The French didn't just film battles, they filmed the human condition under fire. From silent black and white realism to modern recreations that sting with honesty, these films show how memory and courage collide. And trust me, the stories hiding in this list will surprise you. Number 15. La France, 2007. It begins with silence, a letter from the front, a woman left behind, and a decision that changes everything. La France isn't your typical war film, it's a haunting dream wrapped in mud and melody. Director Serge Bozon gives us Camille, a woman who disguises herself as a soldier to find her husband on the front lines during the First World War. What makes this film extraordinary is its surreal tone. One moment you're trudging through mist-covered forests, the next you're hearing soldiers burst into ghostly songs. Bozon turns the war zone into a theater of memory, where music becomes resistance and identity shifts with every scene. The cinematography is intentionally soft, almost poetic, as if the camera itself is trying to forget the violence it sees. When La France premiered, critics didn't know what to make of it. Some called it a musical inside a battlefield, others called it madness. But time has been kind to this strange masterpiece. It stands as a portrait of yearning, a love story caught between uniforms and uncertainty. Beneath the quiet lies a statement about how ordinary people were erased by war, yet still found their own voice. Watch it once, and you'll never hear wartime marching songs the same way again. Number 14. De Gaulle, 2020. Before he was a statue in Paris or a name on a street sign, Charles de Gaulle was just a man fighting to keep his nation from collapsing. De Gaulle takes us to the summer of 1940 when France faced the unthinkable defeat. As the government fractured and panic swept through the country, one soldier refused to surrender. Director Gabriel Le Beauman's film doesn't paint de Gaulle as a mythic hero, but as a husband, a father, and a leader staring into chaos. The scenes alternate between crumbling battlefields and quiet domestic moments where his wife Yvonne struggles to keep their family safe as the country burns around them. Lambert Wilson delivers an incredible performance, restrained but electric, carrying the weight of both personal duty and national despair. What's remarkable is the film's tone. It's not propaganda, it's panic made visible. The lighting flickers between warm candlelight and the harsh glow of urgency. When de Gaulle finally gives his famous broadcast urging France to keep fighting, it feels less like a speech and more like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Many modern viewers discovered the human side of leadership through this film, not through grand speeches, but through quiet determination. It reminds us that behind every monumental decision are sleepless nights, trembling hands, and the sound of a family packing to flee. De Gaulle isn't just history retold, it's courage rediscovered. Number 13. 15 Minutes of War, 2019. Action meets tension in 15 Minutes of War, a French thriller based on a real hostage crisis in Djibouti during 1976. The story centers on a school bus hijacked near the Somali border and the elite French commandos sent to end it before lives are lost. Director Fred Grivois transforms what could have been a simple military operation into a pulse-pounding countdown. Every shot feels sunburned, gritty, and urgent. The dust hangs in the air like fate itself, and the camera rarely gives you room to breathe. While the operation only lasts 15 minutes, the film spends nearly 2 hours building dread so thick you can almost taste the desert heat. But what makes 15 Minutes of War special isn't just the suspense, it's the balance of precision and compassion. Instead of glorifying violence, it shows the toll that decision-making takes on those who pull the trigger and those who watch helplessly. Albin Lenoir's performance as the mission leader is pure steel with a crack of humanity beneath it. Critics called it the French Zero Dark 30, but that undersells its craftsmanship. The film focuses on the fragility of calm before chaos, a teacher comforting children, a soldier questioning orders, the world holding its breath. It's both a rescue mission and a moral dilemma. Stream it, and you'll see how French cinema can make even the shortest battle feel eternal. Number 12. A Man Escaped, 1956. Some heroes fight with rifles, others fight with patience. A Man Escaped, directed by Robert Bresson, tells the true story of André Davigny, a French resistance fighter imprisoned by the Nazis, and the meticulous escape that became legend. No explosions, no grand speeches, just a man, a locked cell, and an unbreakable will. From the opening minutes, you feel the tension coil like wire. The camera stays close, tracking hands, gestures, breaths. We never leave the cell for long. Instead, Bresson turns confinement into choreography, the scrape of a spoon against wood, the whisper of rope fibers twisting, the faint creak of footsteps in the hallway. Every sound becomes a heartbeat, every silence a test of nerve. Bresson's trademark minimalism strips the story of anything unnecessary. There's no sentimental score or dramatic lighting, only raw faith in human perseverance. The title gives away the ending, but somehow that doesn't matter. The suspense comes not from if he escapes, but how he endures the waiting. When A Man Escaped premiered, audiences were stunned by its precision and restraint. Critics hailed it as a sermon on freedom without a single word of preaching. The film went on to influence generations of directors, from Tarkovsky to Nolan, who admired its control and moral gravity. What makes it extraordinary isn't the act of escape, it's the quiet dignity that drives it. In Bresson's world, freedom isn't loud or triumphant. It's deliberate, earned inch by inch through courage so focused it becomes a kind of grace. By the final frame, when the cell door finally opens, you realize that what escaped wasn't just one man. It was the idea that even in captivity, the human spirit remains undefeated. A Man Escaped proves that resilience can whisper louder than any victory song. Number 11. The Long Absence, 1961. Not every war story ends when the fighting stops. Some linger quietly in living rooms and empty cafes long after the guns have gone silent. The Long Absence, directed by Henry Kolpe, is one of those haunting tales, a story not about the battlefield, but about the wounds it leaves behind. The film opens in a small French town 15 years after the Second World War. Thérèse, a widow who owns a modest cafe, lives with a hole in her life where her husband once was. Then one day she sees a vagrant wandering the streets blank-eyed, lost, unable to remember who he is. Something in her breaks open. She's convinced this man is her husband returned from a concentration camp, stripped of memory but not of presence. What follows is not a love story in the traditional sense, but an exploration of longing, denial, and the ache of unfinished grief. Kolpe directs with tenderness and restraint, letting silence do most of the talking. Every shot feels like a memory trying to come back into focus. The cafe becomes a shrine to what once was, and every passing glance between the two characters carries the weight of a lifetime. When it premiered, The Long Absence shared the Palme d'Or at Cannes, a rare honor for such a quiet, deeply personal film. Critics praised its emotional courage, calling it a war film without war. And that's exactly what it is, a portrait of love haunted by loss, of survival that feels more like waiting. By the final scene, you realize the title isn't just about one woman's missing husband. It's about France itself, a country still looking for what it lost in the war's shadow. Few films capture that kind of heartbreak so quietly or so beautifully. Number 10. Line of Demarcation, 1966. Some wars aren't fought on battlefields, they're fought across fences in whispers and in glances that last a second too long. Line of Demarcation, directed by Claude Chabrol, unfolds in a quiet French village split down the middle by the dividing line between occupied and free France. It's a thriller built not on explosions, but on tension so subtle you can almost hear the walls listening. The story centers on a French officer returning home to find his village under German control and his neighbors transformed by fear. Some collaborate to survive. Others risk everything to help the resistance smuggle people across the border. Chabrol doesn't lecture you, he lets moral ambiguity do the talking. Every handshake might be betrayal, every knock at the door might be the end. What makes the film unforgettable is its tone of creeping dread. The cinematography is restrained using fog and long silences to turn rural France into a stage of quiet horror. There's no music to soften the choices people make. You watch loyalty twist, suspicion grow, and humanity get tested. In the smallest gestures, a loaf of bread passed through a window, a forged document tucked under a tablecloth. Critics called it the most French war film imaginable, meaning that it's elegant, understated, and devastating all at once. Unlike the heroic tales of victory, line of demarcation forces you to face the slow, grinding fear of occupation. It's not about soldiers, it's about ordinary souls holding their breath. When the credits roll, you realize that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought in silence. Number 9. Le Grand Cirque, 1950. Before Top Gun ever took flight, Le Grand Cirque gave us the real story of men who soared into danger for free France. Based on the memoir of fighter ace Pierre Clostermann, this film doesn't just show dogfights. It captures the loneliness above the clouds. Released only 5 years after the war, it still smelled of jet fuel and loss. Director Georges Péclé's vision feels almost documentary-like. The actors, many of them actual veterans, fly authentic Spitfires and Hurricanes across real skies. You can hear the engines tremble, you can sense the claustrophobia of the cockpit. There's no glamour here, just young men aging decades in a single sortie. The film's greatest strength lies in its honesty. The pilots aren't portrayed as flawless heroes, but as exhausted brothers chasing both duty and survival. Between missions, they write letters, smoke in silence, and joke about the next day, knowing the next day might not come. The editing mimics the rhythm of combat. Calm chaos, calm again. When Le Grand Cirque hit theaters, French audiences filled every seat. For many, it wasn't entertainment, it was remembrance. Families recognized faces, names, and call signs of real pilots who never returned. Critics hailed it as Truth with Wings, a film that dared to show grief at 20,000 feet. Even decades later, the film's aerial sequences remain stunning because they were real. No models, no digital tricks, just sky courage and a camera that never blinked. If you want to understand what it meant to fight for freedom with nothing but steel and willpower, Le Grand Cirque is your boarding pass. Number 8. Le Bataillon du Ciel, 1947. Imagine filming a war movie when the war has barely ended, when uniforms still smell of smoke and the wounds haven't healed. That's Le Bataillon du Ciel, one of the first post-war epics made in France. Directed by Alexandre Azoulay, it follows free French paratroopers training in England and then jumping into occupied territory to join the liberation. Everything about it feels authentic because it was. The extras were real soldiers, many playing versions of themselves. The parachute drills were genuine. The jump scenes were shot with cameras strapped to chests. There's a roughness to the film, a kind of unpolished honesty that modern productions can't imitate. Rather than focusing on one hero, it gives voice to the collective. You see the doubts before the jump, the banter between comrades, and the way humor becomes armor. There's no sweeping romance, no tidy ending, just men dropped into a storm of uncertainty. One of the film's most chilling moments comes when the paratroopers stand in the door of the aircraft engines, roaring, their faces lit only by the red glow of the jump light. You can feel their heartbeat in your chest. Upon release, audiences wept openly. Critics called it the film France needed to heal, and they were right. It was more than cinema, it was national therapy. Watching it today, you're reminded that these weren't actors pretending to be brave, they were veterans trying to remember why bravery had been necessary at all. Le Bataillon du Ciel stands as proof that when reality itself writes the script, the result is unforgettable. Number 7. Days of Glory, 2006. War may unite nations, but it doesn't always treat its soldiers equally. Days of Glory tears open one of France's most uncomfortable truths, the story of North African troops who fought and bled for a country that barely remembered their names. Directed by Rachid Bouchareb, this film follows a group of Algerian, Moroccan, and Tunisian soldiers serving in the Free French Army during World War II. From its first frame, you can feel the injustice simmering beneath the surface. These men march under the same flag, face the same gunfire, yet receive half the rations and none of the recognition. The cinematography is blisteringly real, the mud, the sweat, the slow burn of pride and resentment. Bouchereb's direction refuses sentimentality. He gives each soldier a distinct voice. The idealist, the cynic, the dreamer, the veteran who's seen too much. Their camaraderie feels genuine, but so does the bitterness when promises are broken. The dialogue cuts like shrapnel, short, painful, and true. When Days of Glory premiered at Cannes, the standing ovation lasted nearly 10 minutes. It didn't just impress critics, it changed history. Public outrage over the film's message led the French government to finally equalize veterans' pensions for colonial soldiers who had been shortchanged for decades. That's the power of cinema done right. It doesn't just replay the past, it rewrites it. Days of Glory is more than a war movie. It's an overdue salute to forgotten heroes whose courage was real even when gratitude wasn't. Watch it, and you'll understand why silence can be the cruelest wound of all. Number 6. Free Men, 2011. Courage sometimes begins in unlikely places. A crowded market, a rented room, or a mosque hiding secrets beneath its prayers. Free Men, directed by Ismail Farouki, dives into a little-known chapter of French history. The role of Paris's Muslim community in protecting Jewish families during the Nazi occupation. The story follows Younes, a young Algerian black marketer who's arrested and offered freedom in exchange for spying on the local mosque. But once inside, he discovers compassion and defiance where he expected fear. The Grand Mosque of Paris becomes a sanctuary, forging identity papers, sheltering refugees, and standing quietly against tyranny. Farouki's direction is elegant and restrained. Instead of flashy heroics, he focuses on gestures, a glance, a handshake, a door left unlocked. The camera lingers on faces illuminated by candlelight, turning every act of kindness into a rebellion of its own. Tahar Rahim's performance anchors the film. You watch a man evolve from self-interest to moral clarity, and it feels absolutely real. What makes Free Men extraordinary is its tone of quiet resistance. It doesn't shout, it whispers truth. Critics praised its blend of historical accuracy and emotional intimacy, calling it a story history forgot, but humanity remembers. The real-life imams who risked their lives saving others are honored here, not with monuments, but with light, soft, golden light that cuts through darkness. By the end, when Younes finally chooses principle over safety, you realize the film's title isn't just about liberation from occupation, it's about freedom of conscience. In a world divided by fear, Free Men reminds us that decency itself can be an act of defiance. Number 5. Capitaine Conan, 1996. War doesn't always end when the guns go silent. Capitaine Conan shows what happens when soldiers trained to fight can't find peace in victory. Directed by Bertrand Tavernier, this gritty masterpiece unfolds in the months after the First World War. The men of Captain Conan's unit, elite commandos who thrived on chaos, now struggle to live by peacetime rules they no longer understand. Philippe Torreton's performance as Conan is mesmerizing. He's not noble, he's not gentle, he's raw energy barely contained. His men worship him, fear him, and follow him into trouble long after the ceasefire. Tavernier shoots their descent into lawlessness with painful honesty, showing how the instinct for survival doesn't just switch off when the treaties are signed. The film's dialogue crackles with truth. Conan's outbursts against bureaucrats and politicians feel timeless. "You made us killers," he rages, "and now you ask us to be gentlemen." It's a line that echoes across a century. The cinematography is washed in gray and smoke, capturing the hangover of a war that left no real winners. When Capitaine Conan premiered, critics called it a war film with no battles, and that's precisely what makes it unforgettable. It's not about glory, it's about the wreckage of souls who don't know what to do with peace. Watching it feels like reading a confession scrawled in mud and sweat. By the end, you're left wondering whether victory means anything if the people who earned it can't live with what it cost. Number 4. The 317th Platoon, 1965. Deep in the jungles of Indochina, a small French platoon faces the impossible. Outnumbered, cut off, and surrounded by an enemy they can't even see, they fight not for triumph, but for survival. The 317th Platoon, directed by Pierre Schoendorfer, is one of the most realistic war films ever made, and for good reason. Schoendorfer himself was a war cameraman who lived through these exact events. Shot entirely on location in Cambodia, the film trades spectacle for authenticity. The camera doesn't flinch. You hear every rustle in the leaves, every whisper of paranoia as the jungle seems to close in around them. The soldiers are not heroes. They're exhausted men watching the map shrink with every passing day. The power of the 317th Platoon lies in its minimalism. There's no soundtrack, no soaring speeches, just the suffocating rhythm of fear. It's less about who wins and more about what endurance costs. The relationship between the young lieutenant and his grizzled sergeant forms the emotional backbone. Youth versus experience, hope versus resignation. When it was released, French critics were stunned. Veterans called it the only film that got it right. American directors like Francis Ford Coppola and Oliver Stone later cited it as a major influence on Apocalypse Now and Platoon. Schoendorfer didn't dramatize the war, he preserved it raw and unfiltered. If most war movies are about courage, the 317th Platoon is about exhaustion. It reminds you that bravery often looks like simply taking one more step through the rain even when the world has already moved on. Number 3. To Be 20 in the Oars, 1972. Imagine being 20 drafted and told that your ideals mean nothing. To Be 20 in the Oars is a gut punch of a film that captures France's most controversial conflict, the Algerian War, through the eyes of young pacifists turned reluctant soldiers. Directed by René Vautier, a filmmaker who himself fought censorship for telling the truth, this film doesn't ask for sympathy. It demands reckoning. The story follows a group of conscripts from Brittany who believe in peace until they're thrown into the desert and told to fight. The sun burns, the orders get crueler, and one by one innocence evaporates. The dialogue feels improvised because much of it was. Vautier cast non-professional actors, many of whom were veterans, giving every scene a documentary edge. What makes To Be 20 in the Oars extraordinary is its courage to question authority at a time when doing so was dangerous. The film was nearly banned in France for years because it refused to paint the conflict as noble. Instead, it exposes how good men become broken by duty and how silence can be its own form of surrender. The cinematography is stark and relentless. The desert becomes a moral battlefield, vast, blinding, and indifferent. Critics later hailed it as one of the first anti-war films to show what happens when patriotism collides with conscience. Watching it today feels eerily modern. By the final act, the film's title becomes bitterly ironic. These young men went to war believing they'd return wiser. Instead, they returned older, haunted, and silent. Few films capture the death of innocence as brutally and honestly as this one. Number 2. The Battle of Algiers, 1966. If realism had a heartbeat, it would sound like the Battle of Algiers. Gillo Pontecorvo's masterpiece, though Italian-directed, is told through French and Algerian voices, making it one of the most powerful French-language war films ever made. Set during the Algerian struggle for independence, it captures the chaos, fear, and moral fog of urban warfare with documentary precision. Shot entirely on location with non-professional actors, it's so authentic that many audiences in the 1960s thought they were watching real news footage. Pontecorvo used handheld cameras, natural light, and unpolished sound to create an intensity that feels immediate. Every scene breathes urgency. The crowded streets, the checkpoints, the whispered plans in smoky rooms. The film doesn't take sides. It simply shows a cycle of action and retaliation where every victory comes at a cost. What makes it haunting is its balance, showing both the desperation of the oppressed and the corruption of those in power. There are no heroes here, only choices that get harder the longer the fighting continues. When it premiered at the Venice Film Festival, it caused uproar and applause in equal measure. It was banned in France for years due to its raw portrayal of colonial tension. Yet decades later it became required viewing in military academies around the world for its unflinching realism. The Battle of Algiers isn't just a film, it's an experience that leaves your pulse racing and your conscience heavy. By the end, you realize you haven't just watched history, you've felt its heat, its dust, and its heartbreak. Number 1. Army of Shadows, 1969. If courage had a shadow, this would be it. Jean-Pierre Melville's Army of Shadows is the crown jewel of French war cinema, a slow, relentless portrait of the resistance that feels more like a memory than a movie. Filmed in Melville's trademark cool blue tones, it's not about battles or explosions, but the quiet terror of living under occupation when every breath might be your last. The story follows Philippe Gerbier, a resistance leader constantly moving through the fog of betrayal. There's no music to reassure you, no glory in the fight, only cigarette smoke, whispered passwords, and the sound of boots in distant hallways. Melville, who himself served in the resistance, captures the paranoia perfectly. Every face could be a friend or a spy. Lino Ventura delivers a masterclass in restraint. His eyes do more acting than most monologues. One of the film's most famous scenes, a silent execution in a basement, unfolds without dialogue, without music, just raw inevitability. It's filmmaking so controlled it feels like you're holding your breath beside the characters. Critics at the time didn't understand it. France, still healing from the war, wasn't ready to see the resistance stripped of its romantic myth. But decades later, the film was rediscovered and hailed as a masterpiece of moral complexity. Quentin Tarantino, Christopher Nolan, and Kathryn Bigelow have all cited it as a key influence. Army of Shadows isn't about winning, it's about enduring. It's about the people who fought in darkness so others could wake in light. Stream it, and you'll understand why silence can be the loudest form of defiance. From fog-covered fields to flickering alleyways, these French war films don't just retell history, they relive it. They show courage not as spectacle but as survival painted in smoke and memory. Each one reveals a different face of resistance, heartbreak, and endurance. So which story gripped you the most? Drop your pick below, hit subscribe for more forgotten classics. And remember, sometimes the quietest battles are the ones that change everything.